Imagine this. The room is quiet, not awkward quiet, the kind that feels earned. You're sitting across from her and nothing urgent is happening. No performance, no chase, just the weight of two lives that have already been lived. You notice how she listens, not to your words, but to what sits underneath them. The pauses, the restraint, the things you chose not to say. And in that moment, something subtle shifts. Not desire in the way it's usually described. Something slower, deeper, more dangerous. Because what older women want in intimacy is rarely what men think they want. It's not intensity for intensity's sake. Not attention, not admiration, not proof. It's recognition. If you're new here, this is Psychology of Desire. This channel isn't about tricks or tactics. It's about emotional science, psychological truth, the quiet mechanics of attraction that work long after the moment has passed. Subscribe if you're ready to understand what most people only feel, but never name. Here's the first truth that breaks the fantasy. Older women are not chasing excitement. They've already had it. They're not looking to be impressed. They've been impressed before and watched it fade. What they're listening for now is something else entirely. Do you see them, or are you just reacting to them? There's a difference that changes everything. Admiration is loud. Recognition is silent. Admiration says, "You're amazing." Recognition says nothing, but somehow lands directly on who she actually is. Older women don't open through compliments. They open through being understood in ways they didn't explain. Not this, not flattery, not intensity, not pursuit. What draws them closer is the rare experience of not having to translate themselves. When you reflect her emotional patterns without labeling them, when you notice her restraint without trying to break it, when you respond to her depth without trying to conquer it, that's when intimacy begins, long before touch ever enters the room. Here's where it becomes unsettling. Attraction, for her, often doesn't happen with you. It happens after you, later, in memory, in replay, when she's alone and something you said returns. Not as words, but as a feeling, an echo. You didn't try to move her. You didn't try to claim her. You left space. And space is where older women feel safest becoming vulnerable. Because vulnerability isn't created by pressure. It's created by permission. When someone understands you without demanding access, the mind relaxes. The body follows later. This is the part most people miss. Being understood is emotionally dangerous in the most intimate way. Because once someone sees you clearly, you can't unfeel it. You can't unknow it. Recognition creates vulnerability. Vulnerability creates attachment. Attachment forms quietly, without conscious choice. Not because you pulled her in, but because she leaned forward internally, without realizing why. And the paradox is this. The less you try to be desired, the more room there is for desire to grow. Older women are drawn to presence, not pursuit. To emotional steadiness, not hunger. To men who don't need intimacy to feel whole, because that makes intimacy feel safe. You don't need to reveal everything. You don't need to ask for more. You just need to remain grounded while something unfolds on its own timeline. Because what she wants isn't urgency, it's depth that doesn't rush. Understanding that doesn't interrogate. A presence that lingers after you're gone. And if that unsettles you slightly, good. That means you're starting to understand where real intimacy actually begins. She won't tell you when it starts. That's another misunderstanding people carry. There is no announcement, no signal meant to be decoded, no dramatic shift you can point to and say, "This is the moment." For older women, intimacy doesn't arrive loudly. It settles. It shows up as comfort before desire, as trust before touch, as a subtle easing of defenses she didn't even realize she was holding. And it happens when she feels emotionally unobserved, yet deeply known. Here's the truth most never hear. Older women are not afraid of intimacy. They're afraid of misrecognition, being wanted for the wrong reasons, being desired for a version of themselves they've already outgrown, being reduced to appearance, availability, or performance. They've lived that story. They know how it ends. So what pulls them closer now is not intensity, but accuracy. Do you respond to who she is, or to who you want her to be? Because she feels the difference instantly. When you don't rush to fill silence. When you don't interrupt her emotional rhythm. When you let her finish a thought without steering it somewhere safer or lighter. You signal something rare, emotional maturity without explanation. And that creates a quiet sense of relief. Relief is powerful. Relief is intimate. It tells her, I don't have to manage this moment. This is where attraction deepens, not upward, but inward. There's something else happening beneath the surface. Older women are deeply attuned to emotional pressure. They can feel when someone wants something from them versus someone who is simply present with them. Desire that leans forward too hard creates resistance. Presence that stays grounded creates curiosity. Not this. Not pursuit disguised as confidence. Not vulnerability used as leverage. Not interest that asks for reassurance. What draws her in is your ability to remain centered while she opens, because that tells her something crucial. If she lets herself feel more, you won't collapse. If she reveals something fragile, you won't exploit it. If intimacy deepens, it won't become a burden she has to carry alone. This is where the psychology turns inward. Older women often experience attraction as a delayed realization. She may not think about you constantly at first. She may not feel urgency. But over time, she notices something unexpected. She feels calmer around you, more herself, less guarded. And the mind starts asking questions. Why does this feel different? Why do I feel seen without being examined? Why do I trust this space? That's the echo effect. Attraction replaying itself quietly, without conscious effort. And here's the part that feels almost forbidden to say. When someone understands you deeply, it creates a soft exposure, a sense of being emotionally undressed without being touched. That exposure bonds, not through chemistry alone, but through psychological safety. Safety allows desire to surface without fear, without shame, without urgency. This is why older women are drawn to men who don't chase closeness, but allow it. Men who don't need intimacy to validate themselves. Men who don't rush to define the connection. Men who are comfortable letting things remain undefined while something real forms underneath. Because intimacy at this stage isn't about discovery. It's about recognition. And recognition doesn't excite the nervous system. It settles it. That's when desire becomes sustainable, repeatable, deep. Not something that burns out, but something that stays. If this feels uncomfortably familiar, if it explains moments you couldn't quite name, then you're starting to see what's really happening beneath attraction. There's a moment most people overlook, a moment where intimacy could move forward, or quietly collapse. It's the moment she shows you something real, not dramatic, not fragile on the surface, but true. A thought she doesn't usually finish out loud, a boundary she mentions casually, a memory she doesn't decorate. And she watches, not to see what you say next, but to see who you become in response. Older women are not testing you. They're sensing coherence. Do your words match your nervous system? Does your presence stay steady when the emotional depth increases? Or do you rush to soften it, fix it, or make it lighter? This is where intimacy either deepens or shuts down without conflict. Because what older women want is not reassurance. It's emotional reliability. Not consistency in action, consistency in being. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Many people are open until someone actually sees them. Then they retreat. Older women notice this instantly. They've learned that being understood can invite danger, control, expectation, entitlement. So when they feel seen, they wait. Do you lean in too fast? Do you start wanting more access? Do you subtly change, seeking closeness, clarity, confirmation? Or do you remain the same grounded presence you were before she revealed anything? That answer determines everything. Because intimacy doesn't deepen through reaction, it deepens through containment, when you don't grasp for what's offered, when you don't hurry to define it, when you allow vulnerability to exist without using it. That restraint is profoundly attractive. Not this, not emotional intensity mistaken for depth, not sharing everything to prove connection, not urgency disguised as honesty. What draws her closer is your ability to hold emotional weight without needing to do anything with it. This is where attachment begins to form, quietly, almost invisibly. She starts to feel safe inside herself around you. And that's rare, because safety isn't created by words. It's created by nervous systems syncing without force. Older women respond to this on a level beneath thought. They feel less guarded, less performative, less alert. And desire grows in that relaxed space. Not sharp desire, not consuming desire, but something slower, something that wraps around memory. She begins to associate you with calm, with clarity, with emotional permission. And here's the paradox that surprises many men. The more emotionally safe she feels, the more intense her desire becomes. Because desire at this stage of life isn't about novelty. It's about depth without threat, being seen without being claimed, being close without being crowded. That balance is delicate. And most people destroy it without realizing how. They push once intimacy begins to warm. They assume closeness means acceleration. They mistake opening for invitation. But older women don't open to be taken. They open to be met. Meeting her means staying present without agenda, interested without expectation, engaged without possession. That's not passivity. That's emotional mastery. And when she senses that mastery, something irreversible happens. She stops monitoring herself. She stops anticipating disappointment. She allows herself to feel desire without bracing for consequence. That's when intimacy crosses from potential into reality, not in a moment, but in a knowing. A quiet internal decision she doesn't announce. And once that decision is made, it doesn't fade quickly, because it wasn't built on fantasy. It was built on psychological truth. If this resonates deeper than comfort, if it explains why some connections felt powerful without being dramatic, then you're beginning to understand the invisible architecture of intimacy. There's a final shift that happens quietly. Not when intimacy begins, but when she realizes it's not fragile. Older women don't commit emotionally when they feel desire. They commit when they feel stability beneath desire. When attraction doesn't ask to be fed. When closeness doesn't demand reassurance. When presence doesn't disappear the moment something real appears. This is where intimacy becomes irreversible. Because what she wants, often without ever saying it, is to feel chosen without being consumed, desired without being reduced, close without losing herself. And the moment she senses that you are not trying to take intimacy, but are capable of holding it, something settles inside her. She no longer wonders where this is going. She feels it. Not as certainty, as safety. Here's the deepest truth of all. Older women don't fall for potential. They fall for emotional congruence. For a man whose internal world doesn't shift based on access, who doesn't become softer to gain closeness or harder to protect ego, who remains grounded whether intimacy deepens or pauses. That consistency creates trust without discussion, and trust allows desire to deepen without fear of consequence. This is why silence matters so much. When you don't rush to define, when you don't interrupt unfolding moments, when you allow space without withdrawal, silence becomes a container, not a gap. And in that container, intimacy matures. She begins to feel something rare, that she can want you without negotiating herself, that she can open without managing your reaction, That closeness won't cost her autonomy. That's not attraction built on excitement. That's attraction built on respect at the nervous system level. And once that exists, desire becomes loyal, not possessive, not anxious, but enduring. This is why what older women want in intimacy isn't something you do. It's who you remain while nothing is being demanded. It's how you respond when vulnerability appears without invitation. It's how you stay present when there's nothing to prove. It's how you allow connection to grow without trying to own it. Because intimacy, at its deepest level, is not about closeness. It's about freedom within closeness. And when she feels that freedom with you, she doesn't need persuasion. She doesn't need escalation. She chooses quietly. And that choice carries weight. If this felt uncomfortably true, if it named experiences you never had language for, then you're beginning to understand desire the way it actually works. This is psychology of desire. Not advice, not tactics, but emotional science. If you want to explore how attraction forms beneath awareness, how silence shapes connection, and why some bonds linger long after the moment passes, subscribe and sit with what you just felt, because the most powerful realizations don't rush you. They stay.